Welcome to the small scale biochar bucket burn. Here's my stainless steel bucket I bought from Mitre 10, about $40. Please make sure you get one that has been spun like this, not with a weld around the bottom. These things are very resilient, and the stainless steel will last for ages. I begin by putting the bucket on its side. I use the handle to hold it stable, and I build a small fire at the bottom of the opening, about there. The reason I do this is because it's difficult to get a fire going in the bottom of the bucket, where the air has to come down through the smoke to get at the fire. And then when the fire's going, I just stand the bucket up and this fire goes down to the bottom of the bucket, and that's the beginning of my burn. Halfway there now, I'll just let that burn for a bit, put some more bigger wood on it and get a good pile of coals there before I stand the bucket up. Just added some more pieces of wood. You can see that there's plenty of oxygen going in there, feeding the fire, heating up quickly. A little bit of white smoke, but it's still burning off. And we've got quite a clean little fire there. Lots and lots of heat developing in there, and the coals are starting to form. I find if it does start to smoke like this when I put fresh wood on, I just give it a blow and get a bit more heat in the fire, and that smoke disappears pretty quickly, presuming you don't add too much all at once. Even with a fire like this, most of the air that's going into the bottom of the fire comes straight up the face of the bucket and then out the top, so there's not a lot of burning happening down in the back there, the bottom of the bucket. So try and load your fire up pretty tall in the front half of the bucket in here. Don't go down into the bucket, it's not going to burn yet. It'll still turn to charcoal later though. Here's an example of paying attention to really front loading that fire close to the edge of the bucket. We've got quite a nice little fire going on in there now, and we've got coals starting to form, bit of charcoal happening down the bottom there, and pretty soon I'll stand this bucket up and we'll start our charcoal burn. Right, so now we can see all of the wood that I've put on there is well engaged in the fire. There's no unburnt on the surface of the wood that's in there now, so that's a nice hot little freely burning pile of coals that I'm going to use to start the fire at the bottom of my bucket. Before I stand the bucket up, I prepare a pile of fairly small, finely cut stuff that I can throw onto the top of the coals as soon as I stand the bucket up, and that'll catch on fire and just keep the process going, in case the coals sort of decide to go out when I tip the bucket up. To tip the bucket up, I just get a stick that can go underneath the lip of the bucket there, and I just lift it up and stand it up like that. Give the bucket a shake, maybe get a stick and spread those coals out across the bottom of the bucket, and then throw in my pile of little stuff. Not too much, that's going to smoke a little bit while the fresh wood that I've thrown on there heats up, but I think there's going to be enough flame there pretty soon and that white smoke will disappear. But we've got a good layer that's probably 3-4 centimeters deep, spread across the whole bottom of the bucket, and the fire's starting to engage those small bits of wood now, and we've got a nice clean burn going on in there. Now that I've got the fire going and lots of flame there, I just set myself up and go through my box of bits and grab pieces and progressively put them in. You can see I've got fresh bits of wood in there. There's still a nice little bit of flame. There's a little bit of white smoke coming off the fresh wood, but it won't take long before that sort of catches and the fire that's in the bucket is hot enough to burn that smoke as well. And yeah, so that's burning quite cleanly now, and I'm just going to wait until those fresh bits that I've thrown in there have started to char on the outside, get a nice sort of blackened colour, and then I'll throw another 50 to maybe 50% of the surface area of fresh wood. I'm trying to fill all the gaps in, make sure I fill the bucket up. I don't want to pile in the middle. I'm going to use the whole surface area of the bottom of the bucket. Keep throwing in bits of wood, particularly carefully placed. I'll grab a few more out of my scrap bin, and I'm sort of focusing on down on the right hand side of the bucket there. There's a bit of a hole. I'll put a couple of bits there, and there's another hole down there on the left hand side. I'll chuck a piece in there. So now those are going to start to off gas. The flame is still hot enough to start burning that off gas. The pieces that I threw in last time are nicely blackened and starting to char now and burning quite freely. And I will maybe put a few more bits in. I like to put in many small pieces rather than a few big pieces, and that's why I have the chopping block handy. Now I'm lucky to have this wood waste from the school, but you could just as easily use this kind of dry, very dry branch material from garden cleanups and pruning jobs. Just remember to make sure it is really dry, and have an axe here so you can split it into small bits so it fits down into the bucket. We don't want this. This is a bad idea, having a piece of wood like that, because this piece of the wood's going to get very hot. It's going to off gas with white smoke, and all that white smoke's going to disappear into the above the fire without having a chance to get burnt. We need to have all our wood lying down on the surface of the fire. So chop it into small bits. This is one of the drawbacks of the bucket burn. Because of the shape of the bucket, it's difficult to get a very hot fire drawing oxygen down the side of the bucket, and we do get periods when we've got a little bit of smoke coming up. And the trick that I've found there is just to put smaller bits in, feed it fairly steadily. The smaller it is, the less it will do that, because I think the hotter the fire becomes. So this is what the fire looks like just before I add new material. Everything's charring, burning quite brightly. I've prepared the next pile that I'm going to put on. So now I'm just going to drop that in strategically, trying to fill in the spaces. And the trick here is really learn how much you can put on without too much smoke developing. I'm going to flick that one over to there. So that's actually looking about right. We've still got lots of actively burning wood. We've got 5 or 6 pieces of wood in there that are starting to catch on fire, and because of the heat they catch on fire pretty readily, and relatively clean burn, not a lot of smoke coming out of there, nice big flames. Now here's that fire about 2 minutes later, and you can see the stuff that I'd thrown on there is well engaged. So I'm going to put on the next layer, trying to find some gaps to fill in. I like to try and line it up parallel because it seems to settle down, makes it a little bit more dense. That last piece was a bit long because it's bridging across the bucket and not settling down onto the surface of the fire. So I'm going to whip that out. I'll change its shape and put it back in later. So I can put a piece down in there and a piece there. There we go, that looks about right. That piece that I just whipped out of the fire had only been in the fire for a matter of seconds really, and you can see there's enough heat in the fire to really start to get that wood to char quite quickly, and that's really what we want. That's because the wood is small, and a small volume of wood heats up a lot more quickly than a bigger volume in a single piece. That's why I like to chop it up quite small. So a couple of minutes later, you can see we've got a good lot of flame coming out of there. I can still, you won't be able to see it, but I can still see a little bit of black sooty material coming off the top of the flames once they cool down and stop burning up about that level there. There's a little puff of black coming out of the top. That's unburnt carbon. So I'm just going to wait until that sort of drops back a little bit until I put the next load of wood on. Now, even though I've been burning for maybe 10 minutes or more, The pile of coals in the bucket is still only up to about that level. That's obviously because it's compacting and reducing in volume as we put the wood in. So it hasn't really got a lot of heat in it yet. I'm still building up that fire to have a really good solid bed of coals in the bottom. That's what we're looking like. So I'm ready to put a few more bits in. Going to go for the gaps again, one over there, parallel one down there, maybe one there, and I could probably squeeze another couple in on the other side. I'll just cut those. Having a little chopping block next to your bucket setup is really handy, because then you can really produce the size of wood that you want to put into the fire at any particular time, and it's fun just sitting here chipping away, having a cup of tea. Okay, I've fallen into the trap of putting a little bit too much wood on and not having enough free burning flame going, and it's going through a little bit of a smoky phase. Slowly that flame is starting to rebuild on fresh wood that I've put in there, but this is what we want to try and avoid. And having a handful of very fine cut material ready to go to chuck on there to create a flare of flame is a way of managing that bit of a smoke issue, to get the flame back into the fire. It's slowly picking up again though, and there it is. Those bits are starting to burn a bit more freely with open flame, and you can see how the smoke is reduced. When I realized I was having this problem, I scoured the internet to find a solution, and I sent away to America to buy a very special tool to help me out here. No, just kidding. It's just a little piece of cardboard, and you can use that to fan a bit of oxygen in there and get things going a little bit more quickly. Yeah, that's a short-term solution. The long-term solution is put a bit of fine, free-burning stuff in there to build a bit of a flame up again, and don't feed it too quick. Amazing what you find in the school scrap bin. This kid's been practicing his dovetails, and that one was having a go at a spoon. Here's our progress. Starting to get a bit more of a layer of coals in the bottom. And here is a pile of pencils that I've created in case I have that slow flame again. I can just throw these small bits in and they should ignite pretty quickly and get the flame going again. I might even try putting those in at the same time as I put in these more chunky bits. Now I know John Raitt is sitting here looking at me thinking, tiny bits like that. He throws in tree branches and stuff, but his kiln is much bigger than mine. Now because I was chatting too much, the fire died away quite a lot, so I've put 5 of those little pencil sized pieces in there, and I'll wait for them to get burning before I add any more wood. And you can see that it doesn't take very long. They're starting to engage now. That's only been 15 seconds they've been in there, and they're starting to build that fire up again. So now I'm going to put some more of the bigger pieces in. Like that. Like that. And it's time consuming, but if you've got a cup of tea or a bit of company, or a child, that's even better. The children love doing this, so engage one of the local children if you haven't got any of your own, and invite them to come over and put wood on a fire. You'll have them for hours. That last piece I put on is sitting up on top of the previous piece. Just there's an overlap, and it's difficult for that corner of that piece of wood to heat up because it's being protected by the piece underneath it. So try and give them all their own space when you put them in. Oh, that's hot. So that they can heat up evenly all the way around. And you can see as soon as I did that, that edge of that piece of wood started to engage. Now that I'm putting bigger and bigger pieces in, the chance of overlapping like that is going to increase. Yeah, it's starting to go now. So you can see in a matter of, less than a minute, each piece is getting up to a good hot temperature and starting to burn quite freely. But yeah, a little bit too quick with those two. There's a little bit of smoke involved. Now the comment I made before about not overlapping the wood, That applies to the new piece of wood you put on and the piece you put on previously. Obviously, it's okay to overlap the new piece of wood over a piece that's already been in there, because that piece underneath this piece is very hot already, and it's going to help this piece catch on fire. But if I put that piece there on top of that piece that's just still warming up, the bottom piece would cool down the fresh piece and it wouldn't burn so well. So you can see I've just tipped it over, that new piece is charring already. Okay, we've got about 8 to 10 centimetres of good coals in the bottom of that now, so I'm putting in bigger chunks, but I'm also including, as I feed the bigger chunks in, some of the smaller pencil size shapes, just to keep good flame rolling along and to encourage those bigger chunks to actually catch fire and start burning. There's quite a good lot of burning going on in there. Steadily adding, avoiding the smoke production by not putting too much on at once, and putting the pencil woods on to keep the flame going, but the bucket's filling up faster now. Now that the fire has heated up enough and we've got a decent bed of coals, it's about 10 centimetres deep now. It's time to put on the bigger pieces of wood that you've got, because they will be held in the fire for a long enough time to hopefully char all the way through. So I'm going to put one on that side, I'll put one on that side, and just wait until they engage a little bit in the fire before I put too much else on. But I might put a couple of pencils in there just to keep the flame going. Oh, see what happened then? Straight away, too much at once. Bit of cardboard. Yeah, it's nearly good. A couple more pencils down the side there to get a bit more flame. Yeah, that's good. And partway through the process, it's important to turn your attention to more important things. Oh, that's going to be a horrible pour. I'm putting the camera down. Cheers, biochar. We've reached about half the volume of the bucket now, and you can see that the pieces of wood that I'm putting in are more chunky than the pieces that I started off with. That means that the bucket's filling up more quickly with charcoal. At this stage of the fire, don't be tempted to put in paper or cardboard, because it will just produce a lot of ash, and the ash will block up the spaces between the pieces of wood on the surface, and that will limit the amount of burning that they can engage in. It will limit the amount of air movement through this on the cap of the fire, and we don't want ash, we want charcoal. The other thing to avoid, of course, is man-made timbers like plywood, MDF, anything that's treated, and possibly even driftwood that's come off the beach, because it may have an awful lot of salt in it, and I'm not sure what that will do to the fire. Every now and then during the burn, give the bucket a bit of a shake, give it a good rustle around, settle the charcoal down, and that'll make room for more wood, of course, and the more wood we squeeze into a burn, the more charcoal we get out. Pieces are starting to get a bit smaller now, because I am near the top and I want them to burn completely through, and because we haven't got as long to go on the burn, they'll be in the fire for a shorter time, so the smaller size will burn away to charcoal. If I put anything too big on at the moment, there's a possibility that it won't burn all the way through to charcoal. Okay, now we've reached an important part of our burn. Coincidentally, we've reached the top of the bucket that we're burning the wood in at the same time as we reached the bottom of the bucket that was holding all our wood scraps. So that's good. We've converted that whole bucket of wood scraps into biochar. Now if we get in close, you'll see that some of those lumps of wood on top still have not burnt completely. There's one over there. It's got a patch of unburnt wood on it. So we need to find a way of burning those last chunks of wood on the top of the fire completely out to char all the way through. And the way to do that is to have prepared a bunch of pencils, very small bits of wood that are going to burn quickly and brightly, and we're going to scatter those over the top. And what those are going to do is they're going to finish off the flame cap, do all the last burning, and they will finish off the burn of the bigger chunks of wood underneath. So by the time these pencil thicknesses have burnt off, we're going to allow them to burn all the way through to ash. Hopefully the bigger chunks that are now underneath them will have completely charred all the way through. Just for fun and just to finish things off, in a final act of celebration, I often like to put a pile of very thin sticks on. It'll smoke for a little bit, and then it will burst into flame. It's always a nice way to finish off some very fine stuff. Have a good old burn. If you are making charcoal with your friends, now would be the time to say something meaningful. Talk about the cycle of life and stuff, and also give people a chance to blow on it a bit more. That's more like it. Yeah, that's a nice way to finish things off. Okay, so this is the last stage of the biochar burn. All of the wood that we've put on there has burnt away to charcoal. There's no volatile gases being produced anymore. That's the reason there's no flame there. And what's happening is the oxygen that's coming in over the top of the fire now is helping the charcoal itself burn, and that's why we're getting this layer of ash, the grey colour on there. Now it's time to quench it. If we don't quench it, if I left that sitting there, it would be a fire hazard for a start, but it would also, a lot of that charcoal sitting on the surface would disappear. So quenching it does two things. It stops the fire burning and it retains the charcoal that we've already made, but also putting water onto the fire creates a lot of steam, and that steam penetrates the charcoal and, I don't know, activates it or changes its quality a little bit to make it better for biochar. Now, don't just get your hose and blast into the centre. Ain't nobody got any time for that kind of drama in their life. What we're going to do is we're going to carefully pour water down the side of the bucket in a very controlled way. That water's going to go all the way down to the bottom and come up through the fire. And you can go around if you want. If I was to point that water directly at the top of the fire, there'd be a huge puff of steam and ash and make a hell of a mess. So we're just going to keep doing that. I'll let you see the whole thing. So the water's going down to the bottom of the bucket, coming up through the fire, pushing the fire out as it comes up. And we'll reach a point where the water gets up to the top of the bucket, and that will mean all of the charcoal is completely flooded with water, completely charged with water, and the fire is completely out. And that will be the end of our biochar burn. And we'll come back tomorrow morning and tip the charcoal out and we'll have a close look at it. We're nearly there, I think. Yep, there comes the water coming up to the surface now through the charcoal, lifting the ash off the surface and putting the last bit of fire out. Now it's safe to water it over the top. And obviously, fire safety, make sure you've got your charcoal completely quenched before you go off and do something else. It ain't out until it's out. I'm going to fill that bucket right to the brim. There you go. And that bucket feels pretty full, actually. I'm going to have a good full bucket full of biochar, I reckon. And can't resist the temptation to snap a few bits and check a few bits to see if they've burnt all the way through right on the top. Find the biggest pieces and see how complete that's completely burnt. There's a chunk. Yep, that's completely burnt. There you go. Bucket biochar. Now that the charcoal bucket burn has been soaking overnight, I'm going to pour off the excess liquid. So that water that's come out of there is not clear. There's a lot of dissolved something in there, but I'm happy to put that water sparingly onto the garden soil, but I will use it to put into a compost pile, so that there's a chance there the living processes in the compost pile will be able to incorporate that into the living system. And I'm going to try and pour out this and leave it in the layers that I added it. So that'll be the top. And then about halfway down the bucket now. And there's the bottom. Starting at the top, there's the residue of the pencil pieces I put in and the very fine stuff I put on at the very end. Just check some big bits near the top. That's all charcoal. That's all charcoal. And going down towards the middle, see if I can find some of those big pieces I put in. The big bits that I put in have broken into smaller pieces, but that's all good charcoal. And then carrying on, there, that piece retains the shape of the piece of wood that it was when it went in, but it's all good, nice friable broken down charcoal. And then we're going to carry on right down to the bottom of the bucket, and this is the remnants of the very beginning of the pile. A lot of that smaller material I put in to get the fire started. So I've got a range of particle sizes in there. It all seems to be fairly well burnt. Good charcoal-y kind of stuff. Now I'm going to show you how I break that up into the particle size that I'm going to put into the compost. So to break the big chunks of charcoal that I've left over in my bucket now into a size that I'm happy to blend through into the compost heap, I use my burning bucket. Because it's a good solid stainless bucket, I can use my spade and I can just chop down into the bucket like that, and just keep chopping until I reach the point where the particle size is where I want it for my compost heap. So partway through that chopping, I'm going to get my two screens made out of mesh bought from Mod 10. That's a 1/2 inch screen. That's a 1 inch screen. So I'll just put it all through the 1 inch screen and see what sizes I've got left. So nothing bigger than an inch left. So that's all less than 12 mil. I'll put that back in the bucket and give it some more. So here's our end result after screening through the 1/2 inch screen, but lots of different particle sizes in there, some very, very fine chunks and chips, almost a paste, a film on my fingers, which is, I suppose, microscopic particles of charcoal, but nothing over 1/2 inch, which I think is a good size to put into the compost. Here's our final result. About 7 litres of chopped, screened, wet charcoal to go into the compost heap from a 40 litre container of wood scraps as the initial feedstock for our biochar. Yeah, pretty happy with that. It may seem time consuming, but if you build it into another event, like a social event, it can be a really efficient way of creating charcoal on a small scale. So now, as I prepare my compost heaps, I add in the garden waste from my garden, and I have my container of biochar handy, and just add a sprinkle as I'm building the heap. That'll do. Try and disperse it through the heap as I build it, and then when I blend it, it's all through the heap and it becomes part of the composting process.